Hey, welcome everyone to the latest installment of MSP Business School. And I am Brian Doyle, as you all know, and with me is Tim McNeil, who's been a regular on our show. And today coming in is a guest star.
We've got the
Robb Rogers. You may have heard of him. I don't think he's been on our last 5 episodes. I'm not really sure.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you fellas.
We decided to ask Robb back. He may make occasional cameos moving forward. We're not sure. It's really up to him, I guess.
I would be happy to be here.
But Tim and I will hold down the fort on those weeks that Robb just can't bestow us with the grace of his attendance. With his presence.
Yeah.
No, but as our honored guest, I want to thank you for coming back, Robb, and in all sincerity. I hope you had a great vacation, recharge those batteries, and got to spend some time with the kids, because that's what we're all doing this for anyway.
Yes, it was a fantastic time.
It's to fantastic do something with our family. So I'm glad
that's right.
You had a good time there. But today, I think we're going to talk a little bit about revenue, right? One of all of our MSP's favorite subjects. How do I increase my revenue, right? Short of actually doing sales functions that include, picking up a phone, calling somebody up, right? But where I think we're going to focus on a little bit today is, what are the levers for increasing revenue? What are the ways that we can approach increases in revenue with our customers so they understand the why behind things, and really, look at some strategies you can employ tomorrow to really look at improving your financial condition as an organization. Tim, you want to lead off on this one?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yes. I think there's a number of different things that people can do. First and foremost, I think there's always been this stigma in the MSP community that you can't just focusing on hardware for a second. And I know it's non-reoccurring, but I think there's historically been this trend where MSPs just don't mark up their hardware enough. Right? We know of actually somebody who's going to be a guest on our podcast in the coming weeks. He's getting as much as 40 points on his hardware. And he's not doing it by some crazy cockamamie scheme. He has figured out a way to get in with the vendors and get better relationships with them. So that's one really effective way to increase your revenue. I mean, to a point where it's staggering the amount.
Is he blending the revenue with the services as a single price point, Tim, or is he's getting back end dollars? Because I mean, just being friends with a vendor has never scored.
Well, that's what Tim means is the back end out, the deal registrations, the special promotions,
exactly. Gotcha.
and not being vendor specific, right? Being able to like shop your vendors a little bit and finding the best deals out there right now. Right now, there's a lot of spiffs going on, and so people are able to do that. So it's working really well. So having somebody dedicated to all those deal registrations and understanding those projects in the manufacturing discounts is important. It's a good way to help you without having to talk to your client.
And I think also putting a automatic kicker in your contract on a yearly basis, an inflationary clause, especially now, it's more important than ever. But a fair amount of MSPs, they just don't do that, right? Contract, they still have that mindset of contract runs out, they still bill, client still pays, they don't really up that price. It's an easy way to right size, but also stabilize your revenue.
Robb, I know this is something you wanted to talk about in depth a little bit, right? So, my thoughts are that's great to put an accelerator in if you're just starting today, but what about those customers that you signed 15 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, Robb, you had some points you wanted to make on this, and then I'll weigh in if appropriate.
Sure. And so here's the number one thing that I'm seeing with clients when we're just starting out with a client. The mindset that if they rock the boat, something's going to go wrong. And I just want to remind people to make sure that you don't fear just fear, right? Like people fear just the fear of something instead of the actual danger. So there's a lot of clients out there and they're raising their prices every year. We have some of our clients raise their prices 10% this year, and you have to, or you're the one that's getting squeezed. So, but how do people do that? And how do they do it where they feel comfortable And then at the same time, they don't fear a client coming back and saying, whoa, I'm going to shop you. Right. So that's the kind of thing I want to discuss with you today, Brian, is how can we help clients kind of itemize how they're going to approach these annual increases with their clients with, and not just kind of wing it, just throw the price into QuickBooks and, bang it out.
So I'll give you kind of a take on some ways that we approached it. Because one thing is if you send it to a customer blindly without a pricing schedule or something like that, you're going to set them off in the wrong way. It unfortunately includes something that a lot of us aren't super comfortable with, and that's having the difficult conversation, right? We have to talk about it. But there are some realities, right? And I used to use the financial indicators out in the marketplace as kind of the discussion point. First and foremost, you got to look at how long the customers had that price, right? Now, I'm going to talk about this in two ways because I bet you most MSPs have both these scenarios sitting in front of them in life. I had the scenario where I had the people that we acquired early in our lifespan and gave sweetheart deals to because we simply needed cash, as we were getting started, and we needed referenceable clients and that kind of stuff, right? The people that had 10 people in had a $500, $750 contract when we got started. And, with those people, I used to approach it. In most cases, it wasn't until their third year, where really we were going through the rectify the contract phase when I started as an MSP. And I sat down with them and I was very blunt. I said, look, when you came on board with us, you had a sweetheart deal. And you're still going to have a sweetheart deal when we're done with this because there's no way I can take you to what our standard rates are. But I do have to do an increase. There's just some realities in the business. One, you've seen our service level improve because you've seen that we've expanded our help desk. And obviously that is a shared resource across all customers. There's also the reality of inflation. The last 3 years, inflation rate was X, Y, and Z. So I'm basing my increase based on inflation, nothing more. And I made that initial increase inflation based. Then I also made sure they signed a new contract at that point, and then I could put in whatever I wanted as my escalator. It usually was 2.5% to 5%, depending on the level of customer, and sometimes, quite frankly, how I felt about the customer. I'm not going to lie, right? If they were really noisy on my help desk, they got a 5% bump. If they were, peaches and cream to deal with, wonderful, you get 2.5%. But you had to have that discussion. And I used inflation really as, I set the tone with, hey, we've been expanding, we're scaling, we're trying to bring more services to you. And you've seen improvement in your service, of course, because you have to, when you're starting as a two-man shop, it can only get better. Yeah. But then I used inflation as that initial jump. Look, inflation in the last 3 years has averaged 3%, and that's what we're making this year's increase. And then, then you make the decision. And I will hold this increase for one more, for the next contract term. Each year, it'll be a 3-year escalator as long as there's a 3-year commit. And now the customer knows how to budget out as well. And that's how I handled those initial customers that we had. Now let's talk about the customers that we may have signed up a little bit later, but now we're trying to right size our environment, right? When we're trying to optimize before we go add on more headcount, we want to maximize what we've got in the stable. These may not be as darling of a relationships from the early days either, right? These could be traditional cold call customer acquisitions. And I would still lean on that inflation barrier, but I would also start looking at breaking out, and this is contrary to how some MSPs looked at it, but breaking out their contract elements. So if I did have to come down to a certain price point, it was reducing service as opposed to reducing cost or discounting, right? So if the customer said to me, hey, I absolutely can't go past 5K, I don't care what you're telling me, that's great. Let's look at the services you got. Well, we can't live without backup and Office 365 and our MSP services, but I can downgrade your service from being 24/7, a help desk and response down to 8x5. And then I can give you a pricing break here or something, something on that order, to make sure that, we were not killing ourselves in the process. And that was the approach I took for those customers.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, one thing that we've heard multiple times over the last 12 to 18 months, because this is always a topic that somebody brings up at some point, right? How do I right size my clients?
Yeah, so the
pricing clause.
inflationary clause is, super important. And Timmy and I used to use it as a negotiation piece, right? If you had a shorter contract, the inflationary clause went up. If you had a longer term contract, we reduced the inflationary clause to give them a benefit for getting into a longer contract with us, right? And that was one of the selling pieces that we would use to, get people into those 3-year deals. So, that was one of the ways that we were able to use the inflationary clause, because we were just like you, Brian. We didn't blame it on vendors. We didn't blame it on price increase. We kept it cyclical with the inflationary clause or the inflationary amounts as well. So that's how it worked for us.
We've seen a lot of clients, especially over the last 12 to 18 months. I mean, really what they're sitting back and they're taking a very common sense approach to it, right? In one of our employees internally, he's somebody that worked at Autotask. Even looking at Autotask before the whole Datto merger or takeover, depending on which side you're on, they would rank their clients, right? They would rank them into A, B, and C clients, and they would, depending on if you fell into an A, B, or C, that would kind of determine what that next right size looks like. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. We have seen a lot of MSPs translate what I just said over to their client deck. And if it's, Brian, to your point, if you've got a client who's maybe more of a pain than another, you're going to draw a little bit more of a line in the sand if they try and negotiate with you. But if you've got a champion who you really don't want to lose, they're giving you referrals left and right, you're going to be you're going to give a little more leeway there. So it can be a case by case situation as well after they sign the contract.
Right. So we've kind of covered off, unless anybody's got anything to add on kind of the approach model for increasing your contract and increasing your recurring with existing customers. Mm-hmm. And, that's certainly one lever that you can pull to bring revenue into your business in relatively short order. The second one is, I think, really going out and looking and saying, am I market priced and can I improve on that as well? Robb, as you were putting together some of the information for sales maturity, one of the things that I saw was that you've kind of got this goals planner you put together, and there was really a few different levers you could choose. And it was really saying, look, if you want to increase revenues, you can pull on recurring revenue and increase that. You can increase the number of customers if you don't want to change your revenue. You can sell more non-recurring products and services to give you a boost in the moment. And those were really the 3 primary levers. And then there's probably subsets from there. Let's kind of, let's break those down a little bit. So we already talked about recurring revenue with your existing customer, but let's talk about, with your brand new customer acquisition. How do we make sure that we're charging the right prices there? And if not, how do we leverage that lever to increase revenue? What's your approach at kind of maybe making sure you're market priced?
2 answers to that. Yeah. So first, you have to be in a peer group. You have to know what your peers are doing. You have to go to these big shows, right? The DattoCons, the IT Nations, at least one every few years to see what the market is bearing. Yeah. Service leadership and, like different organizations like that, where you can see what best in class companies are getting. Talk to your peers, find out what stacks they're using and what type of revenue they're getting, depending on what type of city they're in. Are they in an A-tier city, which is a Chicago and New York? Are they in a B-tier city, which is like a Hartford, Connecticut, or a C, which is kind of rural? From there, you can start understanding what your typical market will bear. That's number one. That's the easiest way to do it. Over the midterm, moving forward from this point on, when you go into a prospect and you're talking to that prospect, somewhere in that discussion, you've got to ask for their current contract and get that information from them. And the easiest way to do it is say, we'd love to do an apples to apples comparison for you so you can understand, the intricacies of the contract. Redact the name, redact the pricing. We offer a fair service for a fair price. We don't need to see all that stuff. We just want to show you the services that we provide versus, anybody else there in the market. 75%, Timmy, 80% of the people always gave us the contract. Most of the time they didn't redact anything. And then we would have our competitors' pricing and all their T's and C's. And that was how we built it up over time. So talk to a peer group, start asking for the contracts when you're in your discovery calls.
Yeah, the asking for those contracts is a fantastic way to not only understand how you're pricing, how you're priced compared to your competitors locally, gives you an advantage when you're in the selling phase. And I believe we've probably talked about this at somewhere along the line during the podcast, but not again, not only can you see, not only do you have visibility into how you sit in your market, man, it's just invaluable, the information that you can get, and you create a white space analysis based on your services versus all of your competitors, and then you just attack from there.
Yeah.
It's an excellent way to make sure that you're right sized, but give you an advantage when
As
you're in
well.
front of a prospect.
Totally agree.
Right. Now let's pivot a little bit out of that, the recurring space, and let's talk a little bit about adding customers, right? Sounds so simple. We've talked often about customer acquisition here. So let's really focus in the time that we've got today, this part of the conversation on realistically, how should you project customer growth? And take that into a goals plan. You know, if you're thinking about how to increase revenue and it's solely based on customer acquisition, how do you goal yourself realistically?
Sure. I'll be the lead off hitter here. If you do not have a sales rep and you're doing this on your own, if you're not using some type of direct mail campaign, like a Robin Robbins, if you're not doing some type of heavy prospecting, you have to look at your previous year and see the company generated leads that you received. And then that's going to be your projected plan. You can add 10, 15% on top of that, but that's all you're going to get. If you don't have a system in place to drive more than you got last year, then you just have to, it's a hope plan, right? And there's nothing really you can do.
Yep.
If you don't have a sales rep and you're going to pick up that sales rep this year, starting, we'll call it January 2023, they are not going to start producing one appointment per month until maybe September or October. And that's if they stayed, right? That's if, they came in, they got the job, they didn't fail the background check, or, something happened. It takes about 9 months for that rep to really start generating one deal per month. And that's close to best in class you're going to get for one rep. You can get two, but that's top 1% reps out there in a monthly recurring revenue model.
See,
Yeah.
I think something that often goes or overlooked in that part of the process too is reality of how you acquire clients today. If you're acquiring them strictly referral, you've got no way to measure exactly how you're going to increase your customer volume unless you have an actual referral ask process that you're going through, right?
Yep.
And you can look back at some of our previous conversations that we've had here about how to ask for the referral and approach the referral. But if you're not asking for 10 a week, you can't expect that to be a realistic funnel source as well, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the way you're doing it, throw that out the window. If you have been doing cold acquisition or those kind of strategies as part of this, you got to start looking at your top of the funnel metrics and say, look, last year we had this many leads coming to the top of the funnel and it yielded this many customers. If I want to double that amount, the reality is I got to have double the leads. Right.
Yeah.
I've got to have double that process. So, a lot of times we focus on the end result, as sales teams and as owners within our business, but we're not thinking about what feeds it. I know from a subscription level, if I've got a subscription target every month, I know what my win rate is, and I know I better I have to get X amount in the top of my funnel. If I don't get, if I get half of X amount, I can't expect to make my monthly number because I'm not going to sell any better. The numbers are what the numbers are. When I see for 6 months consistently, we close X% every month, no matter what strategies I take, it's just numbers.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I mean, generally speaking, for every 8 appointments you get, you're probably going to be getting an appointment, 8641. And what I mean by that is for every 8 appointments, 6 should go to onsite, 4 should go to proposal, 1 should close. And that doesn't happen in a calendar month. We used to see a more consistent 8 appointments a month. If you have a true appointment setter on staff, even that number's gone down a little bit. But
to find people at their desk.
Exactly. But the 8641 still holds true. It just the 8 where it used to be in a calendar month, or what we would expect in a calendar month, has now been stretched out to more like 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's what we've always gauged our numbers on, and it's always been true, to your point.
So I know we're getting close to time here. So, what I'd really like to do is, there might be part of this conversation we're going to have to do in another episode, but I think we've covered off on strategies for increasing your revenue, MRR, both internally or with new customers and with existing customers. And we've talked about how to, really get strategic about actually, projecting customer acquisition numbers. Anything either one of you guys wants to add before we close out for today?
Nope, that's it for me.
Yeah. I
Then
think-
Robb,
I
let's
think
see if you
I did.
remember how to take us home.
Sure, absolutely, fellas. All right, well, this has been a good one, fellas. Understanding the difference between fear and fear of danger, and being able to talk to your clients and understand how to increase that revenue. We will be keeping this thing up on mspbusinessschool.com or anywhere that we get our podcast. If YouTube, we have it on there as well. Brian, Tim, it's a pleasure to be back. I'm glad you guys invited me back and allowed me to come back to your show. It's been a real pleasure. And as always, thanks a lot, fellas, and you have a great day.
Take care, guys. Welcome back,
Yeah.
Robb. Bye.